The dusty range stretched out beneath a burning desert sun, its heat shimmering off the metal targets positioned at impossible distances. A cluster of Navy SEALs stood together, broad-shouldered and confident, their laughter echoing against the canyon walls as they prepared for another round of shooting practice. The SEAL officer leading the exercise, Lieutenant Brooks, carried the easy arrogance of a man who had seen years of combat and victory. His voice was sharp, edged with a scoff, when he dismissed the murmurs coming from the sidelines. "No one can hit that," he said, pointing toward the farthest steel plate, a target set nearly 1,500 yards away, barely visible against the sand. To him, the challenge was rhetorical, a way of underlining the point that even his best men, with all their training and expensive rifles, had struggled to land a shot at that range. Around him, the soldiers nodded, some smirking, some shrugging, all accepting the truth of his statement. That was when a quiet voice, almost hesitant, came from the group of onlookers gathered nearby. "I can try," the woman said, brushing the dust from her simple cotton dress. She wasn't wearing fatigues, nor did she carry the posture of military discipline. Her hands were calloused not from combat drills but from years of labor on a farm outside the city. To most, she was just a local, a civilian who had wandered into the orbit of these hardened warriors. Her presence was tolerated because of her brother, a translator who worked with the SEAL team. But when she stepped forward asking for the rifle, the group of men erupted into laughter, their disbelief sharp and unrestrained. "Lady," Brooks chuckled, "this isn't a carnival game. That target's out there in another zip code. You can't even see it without glass." The woman didn't flinch. She only repeated herself, voice steady this time. "I can try." The laughter rolled over her like thunder, but beneath the mockery there was a flicker of curiosity. One of the younger SEALs, a sharp-eyed sniper named Torres, tilted his head and said, "Sir, let her. What's the harm? Maybe she surprises us." The suggestion was enough to turn the mood from ridicule to mild entertainment, and Brooks, never one to resist proving someone wrong, nodded. "Fine. But when you miss, and you will, I don't want to hear another word about it." He gestured toward the heavy sniper rifle laid out on the shooting mat, its long barrel glinting in the sun. The woman walked forward, ignoring the eyes that tracked her every movement. She lowered herself to the ground, the rifle awkward in her hands at first. Yet as she adjusted, her fingers moved with a familiarity that made Torres frown. She pressed her cheek to the stock, adjusting the bipod slightly, angling the scope with the ease of someone who knew more than she had admitted. "Where'd you learn to hold a rifle?" he asked quietly, crouching beside her. She didn't look up. "My father taught me. Long before the war. We hunted deer. Out here you learn to breathe with the land if you want to eat." The words were simple but they carried weight. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs, then exhaled in a slow rhythm as her eyes settled on the distant target. The laughter around her dimmed. The scope was dialed in, her finger finding the trigger as though it belonged there all along. And then with a steady squeeze she fired. The crack of the shot echoed through the canyon, rolling like thunder against the rock. The steel plate far out in the desert rang with a faint, unmistakable clang. For a moment, silence fell over the entire range. The men blinked, uncertain if they had imagined it, if the sound was some trick of echo and distance. But Torres lifted his binoculars, scanning the far target, and his breath caught. "Direct hit," he whispered, disbelief and awe tangled in his voice. The group of SEALs erupted, not in laughter this time but in stunned shouts and low curses. Brooks himself stood frozen. His earlier scoff burned away by the sight of the impossibility turned real. "No way," he muttered, stepping forward, his eyes narrowing as though sheer will could explain what had just happened. But the woman was already lining up another shot. She fired again and again the target sang. A third shot followed, and the plate swayed faintly under the repeated blows. Her rhythm was calm, her breathing matched to the land around her, as though she wasn't shooting across an impossible distance but simply steadying herself against the pulse of the earth. When she lowered the rifle, only then did she look up, her expression unreadable. "It's not about force," she said quietly. "It's about patience." For the SEALs, hardened by years of missions where precision meant survival, the demonstration was more than impressive. It was humbling. They had spent countless hours in ranges like this one, drilling, adjusting scopes, calculating wind drift, perfecting their craft under the watchful eyes of commanders. Yet here was a woman in a plain dress, no rank, no uniform, no recognition, delivering results they struggled to match. The atmosphere shifted from mockery to uneasy respect. Torres clapped slowly, shaking his head in disbelief, while others muttered to themselves about luck, about tricks, about miracles. But Brooks wasn't convinced. His pride, already wounded, drove him to snatch the rifle off the mat. "Fluke," he growled. "Anyone can get lucky once, maybe twice." He dropped prone, took aim and fired. The shot cracked, but when Torres lifted the binoculars he only sighed. "Missed, sir. Wide left." Brooks adjusted, fired again. Another miss. The frustration carved deep lines into his face, sweat dripping down his brow as he fired 3 more rounds, none of which struck the plate. By the time he stood up, his jaw was tight, his temper barely contained. The woman, however, hadn't moved, her calm presence a stark contrast to his seething energy. "You've done this before," Brooks accused, though his voice lacked certainty. "Not just hunting. This is training." The woman finally smiled faintly, though it wasn't pride that lit her face. It was memory. "When the fighting came to our village, my father and brother were taken. I stayed behind. At first, I used the rifle to keep the wolves away from our goats. Then I used it to keep men away from our home." The words landed heavy in the dry air. For the first time, the SEALs looked at her not as a novelty, not as a joke, but as someone forged in the fire of necessity. Her skills weren't born of privilege or advanced optics, but of survival, of long nights where missing a shot meant losing food or safety. Torres lowered his binoculars and said almost reverently, "You're better than any of us out here." Brooks scowled but didn't argue. Deep down, even he couldn't deny it. From that moment, everything changed. The woman, who had been invisible on the edges of the camp, suddenly became the center of quiet conversations. Soldiers approached her not with jeers but with questions, asking about her breathing technique, how she read the wind, how she steadied her aim without tension. She answered simply, never boasting, always returning to the same lesson. The land tells you everything if you listen. Some of the SEALs began staying late on the range, watching her, trying to mimic the way she moved, the way she held her calm like a shield against failure. And slowly their arrogance softened into respect, their pride reshaped into a willingness to learn. Even Brooks, though reluctant, found himself observing her in silence, his earlier scorn eroded by undeniable truth. For them she was no longer just a civilian. She was proof that mastery didn't always come from rank or training. It came from humility, patience, and the relentless will to survive. The desert night was cold, the stars scattered across the sky like fragments of broken glass. The SEAL camp quieted after hours of drills, but the atmosphere was no longer the same as it had been days before. Ever since the woman had pulled off the impossible shot, the men had looked at her differently, speaking her name with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. They had learned it finally. Her name was Liana, and though she spoke little about herself, every word carried the weight of untold stories. Around the campfire, Torres nudged one of his teammates and muttered, "She's the real deal. We spend millions on training and tech and she walks in with nothing but grit." Others nodded, though Brooks remained apart, arms folded, his jaw tight with unspoken thoughts. His pride had taken a hit, but pride wasn't what gnawed at him in the quiet moments. It was curiosity. Because deep down, even if he never admitted it, he wanted to know how she did it. Not just how she hit the target, but how she carried herself with such unshakable calm, as if the weight of the world couldn't bend her. And in war, men like Brooks had seen nerves fail stronger soldiers than her. The chance to test her came sooner than anyone expected. 2 nights after the demonstration, word came down from command. Insurgents had been sighted moving along the northern ridge, setting up ambush points to disrupt supply convoys. Brooks' team was tasked with intercepting them and time was short. They packed quickly, weapons loaded, night vision gear checked, radios tuned. Liana stood near the edge of the camp, watching with the detached gaze of someone who had seen men prepare for war too many times. Torres, strapping on his rifle, caught her eye. "Stay close to camp, all right? We'll be back by dawn." But before he turned away she asked, "Do you need someone to watch the ridge?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Brooks overheard, scoffing under his breath. "This isn't target practice, lady. This is war." But Torres, more open-minded, frowned thoughtfully. "She's got the eyes for it, sir. And the hands. We'll need overwatch." Brooks bristled, but the mission clock was ticking and arguing wasted time. With a sharp exhale, he tossed her a battered spotting scope. "Fine. You want to play soldier? You stay behind this line, give us eyes. But don't get in the way." They moved out under cover of darkness, boots crunching softly against the rocky earth. The ridge loomed like a black wall ahead, shadows shifting in the moonlight. The team advanced in silence, each man a shadow among shadows, their breaths controlled, their rifles ready. Liana climbed a smaller rise behind them, settling into position with the spotting scope and a borrowed rifle Torres had insisted she take. It was old, not nearly as precise as the sniper rifle she had used on the range, but her hands adjusted to it naturally. She lay still, body blending with the stones, eyes scanning the ridge with a predator's patience. Hours of silence stretched, broken only by the faint crackle of the comms in her ear. Then she saw it, a flicker of movement against the horizon, a silhouette barely visible. She whispered into the mic, calm as water. 3 men moving east to west 200 meters ahead of you. One carrying something heavy. The SEALs froze, adjusted their line of advance, and sure enough, 3 insurgents emerged into their sights, just as she described. A swift burst of gunfire later, the figures fell and the team pressed forward. Brooks paused, listening to the voice in his ear, and despite himself he muttered, "Good call." But the night wasn't done testing them. As the team pushed deeper along the ridge, more figures appeared, an entire cell, maybe 8 or 9 fighters, dug in and waiting. The SEALs had stumbled into the hornet's nest, and the ambush was sprung before they could fully react. Gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes splitting the night, the rattle of AKs filling the air. The SEALs dove for cover, returning fire with controlled bursts. Brooks barked orders, his voice steady despite the chaos, but their position was exposed. Liana, from her perch, saw it all, the angles, the crossfire, the danger her brother's team faced. Her heart pounded, but her hands stayed steady as she raised the rifle, sighting through the scope. One of the insurgents had the high ground, firing down with ruthless precision. Liana exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the man crumpled. Another lined up a rocket-propelled grenade, aiming straight for the SEAL's cover. She shifted, adjusted for distance, fired again. The grenade dropped harmlessly to the dirt as its wielder collapsed. Over the comms, Torres' shocked voice came through, "That's her. It's Liana. She's covering us." Brooks, pinned behind a boulder, heard the words and felt a surge of disbelief. He peered through his night vision and caught glimpses of insurgents falling, one after another, felled not by his men but by the unseen guardian on the ridge behind them. "She's not supposed to be shooting," he growled into the radio, but even as he said it, he knew the truth. Without her, his men would be overwhelmed. Her shots were precise, deliberate, never rushed, each one turning the tide of battle. The SEALs regained momentum, advancing in sync with her overwatch. By the time the firefight died down, the ridge was silent, bodies scattered across the sand, the acrid smell of gunpowder thick in the air. The SEALs regrouped, panting, bruised but alive. Brooks scanned the horizon and finally saw her figure descending the slope, rifle slung across her shoulder, walking with the calm of someone returning from a task completed. She wasn't smiling, wasn't proud, she was simply steady, as if this was just another night of survival. When she reached them, the silence was heavy. Torres broke it first, grinning despite the blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Remind me never to doubt you again." The others chuckled weakly, clapping her on the shoulder, their earlier skepticism replaced with raw gratitude. Brooks, however, stood apart, his expression unreadable. His pride battled with the undeniable fact that she had saved them all. Finally he spoke, his tone quieter than anyone expected. "That was reckless. You weren't supposed to engage." Liana met his gaze, her eyes unflinching. "If I hadn't, you'd be dead." The blunt truth silenced even him. He wanted to argue, to reassert command, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time in his career, Brooks realized that leadership didn't always mean knowing more. It sometimes meant accepting when someone else carried the skill that could save lives. They returned to camp before dawn, the horizon glowing faintly with the promise of sunrise. Exhaustion weighed on every man, but there was also a strange lightness, a sense that they had witnessed something rare. Around the fire, as they stripped gear and tended to wounds, the conversation turned inevitably to Liana. "She's got the eye of a hawk," one of the men said. "Better than any sniper I've trained with." Another nodded. "And the nerves? Didn't see her flinch once." Torres, leaning back against a crate, added, "She doesn't miss. Not when it matters." Liana sat apart, quiet, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea someone had handed her. She didn't bask in the praise, didn't revel in the awe. Instead, she stared into the fire, her expression distant. "You think I do this because I want to impress you?" she said softly, almost to herself. "I do it because I've had no choice. Every shot I've ever taken was to keep someone alive. Tonight was no different." Her words settled heavily on the men. For them, sniping was a skill, a profession honed through discipline and training. For her, it was survival distilled into instinct. They began to understand that her gift wasn't born from luxury or technology but from the harsh necessity of living on the edge of violence for years. And though she claimed no title, wore no uniform, she had become something undeniable to them, a protector. Even Brooks, though reluctant, couldn't shake the image of her calm figure against the chaos of battle, her rifle steady as a lifeline stretched across the dark. In the days that followed, his demeanor toward her shifted, not openly, not with praise or apology, but with a quieter respect, a silence that carried more weight than words. The days after the ambush settled into a tense rhythm. The desert was alive with whispers of new movements, of fighters regrouping in hidden caves, of supply lines threatened once again. The SEALs spent long hours patrolling, drilling, and preparing for the next strike, but something fundamental had shifted within their team. They had come to trust Liana, though none of them admitted it outright at first. It was in the way they glanced toward her when setting up overwatch points, in the way they kept an extra rifle cleaned and ready, in the way Torres always asked if she wanted to join them during range practice. She declined more often than not, but sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the horizon glowed crimson, she would lie prone beside them, showing them small adjustments, how to relax their shoulders, how to feel the wind across the skin of their cheek rather than trust only the flags. She spoke little, but every correction she made landed with precision, and slowly the men began to adopt her ways. Even Brooks, though he never openly sought her guidance, started to linger longer at the range, listening without comment, his pride silently unraveling. It was Torres who pushed the hardest to integrate her into their missions. "She's wasted just sitting around camp," he argued one night as they studied maps under the dim glow of red lights. "You saw what she did on the ridge. She's a natural overwatch." Brooks bristled, his instinct to guard the integrity of his unit rising like a wall. "She's a civilian. No training, no chain of command, no accountability. I can't just slot her into the team." Torres met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Sir, with respect, accountability doesn't matter if we're all dead. You know as well as I do she saved our lives. Twice now." The room was silent, the weight of truth pressing down on everyone present. Brooks ran a hand over his face, sighing heavily. He didn't like it. He didn't like being forced into a corner by reality. But the memory of her shots ringing out in the night, pulling his men back from the brink, left him no room to deny. Finally he muttered, "Fine. But this is on me. If she screws up, it's my head." Torres allowed himself a faint smile. "She won't screw up." The next mission came swiftly, a convoy of armored vehicles scheduled to cross a valley notorious for ambushes. Insurgents had been planting IEDs along the route, using the high cliffs to rain fire down on unsuspecting travelers. The SEALs were tasked with clearing the path and ensuring safe passage. It was the kind of assignment that could go quiet or explode in blood within minutes. As they prepared, Liana stood among them, now wearing borrowed fatigues, her dress folded away. The uniform hung loose on her frame, but she moved in it as though she had worn it all her life. Brooks watched her with an expression caught between skepticism and reluctant acceptance. "Stay sharp. You follow my orders, no exceptions." "Understood." She met his gaze and nodded once. "Understood." It was enough. They set out under the cloak of dawn, the sky painted in streaks of pale orange and gold. The valley loomed like a scar carved deep into the earth, its cliffs jagged and foreboding. The convoy waited miles behind, engines idling, depending on the SEALs to secure the route ahead. Liana took position high on the ridge, rifle steady, scope scanning the rocks for the slightest movement. Below, the team advanced cautiously, sweeping for wires, checking shadows, every step a risk. Hours stretched, tense and silent, until Liana's voice crackled through the comms. "2 men. Southridge. They're digging near the rocks. Burying something." Brooks froze, raised his hand, signaling halt. Torres confirmed through his scope. "She's right. They're planting charges." The team moved quickly, fanning out, approaching with lethal precision. A brief skirmish followed, short, sharp, the kind that left adrenaline burning in the blood. When it was over, 2 insurgents lay dead, and half-buried IEDs were uncovered along the convoy's path. "Good eyes," Brooks muttered into the comms, though his voice was tight as if the words scraped against his throat. Liana didn't respond, only shifted her aim, scanning further. But the enemy was clever. The uncovered IEDs were only the bait. Minutes later, a burst of gunfire erupted from the opposite ridge. The SEALs dove for cover as bullets ricocheted off rocks, the air alive with the whine of near misses. Insurgents had hidden themselves well, waiting for the distraction. Liana pivoted instantly, sighting down her scope. She saw them before anyone else did, shadows moving in coordinated bursts, firing down with deadly intent. Her rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times, each shot deliberate, each target falling in silence. She called out positions calmly, guiding the SEALs through the chaos. 3 on the left ridge. 1 behind the boulder at 2 o'clock. Another moving to flank. Her voice was steady, controlled, anchoring them in the storm. The men fought with renewed confidence, moving as though tethered to her eyes. Brooks, pinned behind a rock, realized with a start that she wasn't just supporting them, she was commanding the battlefield, shaping the fight with every observation, every shot. The battle raged for nearly an hour, insurgents pressing hard, determined to choke the valley in blood. The SEALs returned fire with relentless efficiency, but it was Liana who shifted the balance again and again. When an enemy sniper set up on the far ridge, she spotted the glint before the first shot was fired and dropped him with a single round. When a group tried to circle wide, she cut them down before they could position themselves. Her rifle was an extension of her will, and her will was unyielding. By the time the last echoes of gunfire faded, the valley was littered with bodies, the threat crushed. The convoy rolled through minutes later, engines rumbling, soldiers inside unaware of how close they had come to annihilation. For the SEALs, the truth was clear. Without her they would not have walked out. As they regrouped, Torres clapped her on the back, grinning despite the exhaustion carved into his features. "I told you she wouldn't screw up." The others murmured their agreement, nods of respect passing around the circle. Brooks stood slightly apart, his gaze fixed on her as she cleaned the dust from her rifle. His pride was still a bitter pill, but what he felt now wasn't humiliation. It was something heavier, an acknowledgement that she wasn't just a lucky shot or a reckless civilian. She was something rare, something he hadn't seen even among the best snipers he had trained. She didn't miss, not when it mattered, and more than that, she didn't hesitate. In war, hesitation killed. She carried none. That night back at camp, Brooks called her aside. The firelight cast shadows across his face, making him look older, wearier. "You saved us again," he admitted quietly, the words tasting foreign. "I don't like saying it, but I can't deny it anymore. You belong out there. Maybe more than some of my men." Liana looked at him, her eyes reflecting the flames. "I don't belong anywhere," she said softly. "War isn't where anyone should belong." The word struck him harder than any bullet. For all her skill, all her calm, she hadn't asked for this life. She carried it because she had no choice. Brooks nodded slowly, understanding in a way he hadn't before. "Maybe. But as long as you're here, you're one of us." For the first time, his voice held no trace of mockery or doubt. And though she didn't smile, there was the faintest shift in her eyes, a flicker of something like acceptance. The desert winds carried whispers of change in the days that followed. Word of the valley fight spread faster than gunfire, carried on radios and through hushed conversations among Allied soldiers. They spoke not only of the SEAL team's victory but of the woman who had turned the tide. Some dismissed it as rumor, others swore it was true, but inside the camp there was no debate. Every man who had been there knew what Liana had done, and their respect for her deepened into something closer to reverence. She didn't seek attention. If anything, she avoided it, drifting quietly around the edges of camp life, but she could no longer walk past a group of soldiers without feeling their eyes on her, a silent acknowledgement of the unshakable truth. And yet, for all the recognition, she remained the same, calm, reserved, unassuming, as if nothing had changed at all. Only Torres seemed eager to celebrate her, telling anyone who would listen about her impossible shots, her nerves of steel. Brooks, however, stayed quiet, watching her with the wary gaze of a man struggling to reconcile pride with reality. One evening, as the sun bled across the horizon, Brooks called a private meeting in the command tent. The air inside was heavy with dust and tension. Maps of the region lay spread across the table, red markers indicating hot zones of enemy activity. "They know we've been moving convoys," Brooks said, tapping one area with his finger. "Intelligence says they're planning something bigger this time. More men, heavier weapons. If they take that pass, they'll cut us off completely." His men leaned in, listening intently. Torres spoke first. "So what's the plan, sir?" Brooks' eyes flicked toward Liana, who sat quietly at the edge of the tent, invited but not entirely belonging. He hesitated before answering, his voice carrying an unusual weight. "We set an ambush. If they're going to throw everything they've got at us, we'll be waiting." He paused, then added reluctantly, "And she'll be our overwatch." No one argued. The memory of the last battle was too fresh, too raw. They trusted her more than they trusted luck, and perhaps even more than they trusted themselves. Liana, however, frowned slightly. An ambush can cost you dearly if you underestimate them. They'll come hungry, reckless, believing we can't match their strength. Brooks met her gaze, nodding once. Then we show them what strength really looks like. For the first time, their voices carried a kind of unspoken unity. The night of the ambush arrived like the calm before a storm. The SEALs moved into position along the rocky cliffs of the pass, laying charges, setting fields of fire, whispering final checks into their radios. Liana climbed higher than the rest, choosing a perch that gave her eyes on the entire valley. The moon was bright, casting silver across the rocks, but shadows clung to the edges like waiting predators. She lay prone, rifle steady, her breathing matched to the rhythm of her heartbeat. Below her, the men waited in silence, the weight of anticipation pressing down like a physical force. It began with the crunch of tires on gravel. A convoy of enemy trucks rolled into the pass, headlights dimmed, engines growling low. Dozens of men spilled from the vehicles, their movements confident, organized. They believed the road was theirs. Liana's scope tracked them, her finger light on the trigger, waiting. Brooks' voice came through the comms, a whisper edged with steel. Hold. Not yet. The insurgents moved deeper, spreading out, setting up heavy weapons. The pass began to fill with their presence, the numbers swelling like a rising tide. Then, with a sharp exhale, Brooks gave the word. Now. The night exploded. Charges detonated, rocks collapsing onto the road in thunderous waves. Gunfire erupted from both cliffs, the SEALs unleashing precise bursts into the chaos below. Shouts and screams filled the air as the enemy scrambled, their formation shattered. Liana's rifle cracked above it all, each shot cutting down a man who sought to rally, who tried to aim a heavy gun toward her brothers below. She moved like a shadow, her scope dancing from target to target, her hands steady despite the storm of violence unfolding around her. Every time the enemy tried to regroup, her bullet found the one man who could lead them. Every time a weapon turned toward the SEALs, she silenced it. But the enemy was relentless. Waves of fighters poured into the pass, more than the SEALs had anticipated. The air was thick with dust and smoke, visibility collapsing into confusion. Brooks barked orders, his voice raw as he directed fire, but even his seasoned men began to strain under the pressure. Ammunition ran low, grenades shook the cliffs, the ground trembled with the force of so many bodies pressing forward. Torres shouted into the comms, "We're getting pinned down, sir." Brooks glanced toward the ridge where Liana was positioned, his voice hard. "Liana, do you see their line of advance?" She scanned quickly, her sharp eyes picking out a group moving along the far cliff, carrying explosives meant to breach their defenses. Her heart hammered, but her voice was steady. "I see them. Left ridge. They'll bring the wall down on you if they reach it." Brooks didn't hesitate. "Take them out. Now." Her rifle roared. One man fell, then another, each shot a lifeline pulled tight around the SEALs below. The last man, desperate, dropped his pack and ran, but her bullet caught him before he could reach cover. The explosives detonated harmlessly in the open, a blossom of fire lighting the night sky. The men below roared in approval, their confidence surging once more. But even as she reloaded, Liana felt a chill settle in her chest. They were holding, for now, but the enemy was throwing everything they had at this pass, and eventually even her steady hands might not be enough. The fight dragged on for hours, the darkness alive with fire and fury. The SEALs fought like wolves, every inch of ground. Contested, every breath a battle. Liana's rifle grew hot in her hands, her shoulders aching from the relentless focus, but she did not falter. She could not. Too much depended on her. At one point, Brooks' voice broke through the chaos, low but clear. "Liana, you're saving us again." She didn't answer. She only fired. When dawn finally broke, the valley was a graveyard. The enemy had been broken, their bodies scattered, their trucks burning husks. Smoke curled into the morning sky, carrying with it the stench of defeat. The SEALs staggered from their positions, bloodied but alive, their eyes hollow with exhaustion. Brooks stood among them, his rifle hanging at his side, his gaze fixed on the ridge. Slowly Liana descended, her face pale, her steps heavy. She looked less like a hero and more like a ghost, someone who had given too much of herself to the night. No one spoke at first. The silence was heavy, reverent. Then Torres stepped forward, his voice rough but certain. "She's one of us. You all see it now." The men nodded, some clapping her shoulder, some simply bowing their heads in quiet respect. Even Brooks, who had resisted more than anyone, found his pride broken beyond repair. He approached her, his voice low. "You held the line when none of us could. Whatever you think you are, whatever you call yourself, it doesn't matter. Out here you're ours. You've earned it. Liana met his gaze, her eyes shadowed with fatigue but steady as ever. I don't fight to belong, she said softly. I fight because I must. Her words, simple and honest, cut deeper than any declaration of loyalty. And in that moment, Brooks understood. She wasn't chasing recognition, wasn't seeking a place among them. She was a woman carved by survival, by necessity, by the cruel weight of war. And that made her more dangerous and more valuable than any soldier he had ever commanded. The ambush in the pass had secured the convoy route, but it also painted a target on the SEALs' backs. Intelligence reports soon confirmed what everyone already suspected. The enemy was furious. They had lost too many men, too much equipment, and their pride had been shattered by a fight they believed they should have won. Now, whispers drifted through the desert like smoke. Whispers of vengeance, of a counterstrike larger and more brutal than anything the SEALs had faced so far. Brooks gathered his men in the command tent, the air heavy with the weight of what was coming. Maps littered the table, but no amount of red ink could capture the danger they faced. They're coming for us, Brooks said flatly, his voice stripped of pretense. And they're not going to stop until we're all dead. The men exchanged grim looks. Torres leaned forward, his jaw tight. Then we hit them first. Find their staging ground, burn it to the ground. Brooks nodded slowly, but his eyes flicked toward Liana, who stood in the corner, silent as always. We'll need her eyes, he admitted, the words heavy with reluctant respect. That night, Liana climbed with Torres to a high overlook, their mission simple but dangerous. Locate the enemy camp before the main force arrived. The desert stretched out before them, a sea of shadows under the pale moon. Torres adjusted his scope, scanning the horizon, but it was Liana who spotted the flicker of firelight first, far off in the distance. There, she whispered, pointing to a cluster of faint glows barely visible against the black earth. Through the scope, Torres saw them, dozens of tents, trucks, men moving like ants in the firelight. That's them, he breathed. That's their whole damned army. They counted for nearly an hour, silent and patient, each figure, each vehicle noted and marked. When they returned to camp with the intelligence, Brooks' expression hardened. Too many to take head-on. We'll need to bleed them before they get close. His gaze lingered on Liana. That means you. The plan was audacious, maybe reckless. Hit the enemy camp with a long-range strike, sow chaos before the main battle could even begin. Liana would be positioned far out with a rifle, tasked with creating disruption, taking out leaders, sowing panic, forcing the enemy to scatter while the SEALs staged hit-and-run raids around the perimeter. She listened to the plan quietly, her face unreadable. When Brooks finished, she finally spoke. You're asking me to start a storm. Once I fire, there's no turning back. Brooks didn't flinch. The storm's coming whether we want it or not. Better we decide when it begins. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Then I'll begin it. The following night, the desert was alive with tension. The SEALs moved like shadows, slipping through the rocks, every sound muffled by the gravity of what they were about to do. Liana climbed to her position overlooking the enemy camp, her rifle cradled in her arms, her eyes calm despite the pounding of her heart. Below her, the camp was alive with noise, fighters laughing, weapons clattering, trucks rumbling. It looked almost like a village, but she knew better. These men weren't farmers or herders. They were killers, and tomorrow they would bring death to her brother, to the SEALs, to anyone in their path. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. When she exhaled, she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, sharp and clean, and a man at the center of the camp fell instantly. Shouts erupted, men scrambling in confusion, eyes searching for an unseen threat. Liana adjusted, fired again. Another leader dropped, the chaos multiplying. Below, the SEALs struck in perfect timing, detonating charges on the fuel trucks, turning the night into fire and thunder. The camp erupted in panic, men screaming, running in all directions, unsure where the death was coming from. Liana's rifle cracked again and again, each shot deliberate, each target chosen with surgical precision. She cut down men who tried to rally, men who reached for radios, men who might have restored order. Every bullet she fired deepened the chaos, spreading fear like wildfire. The battle that followed was a blur of fire and shadows. The SEALs struck hard, then vanished, reappearing from another angle to strike again. Explosions lit the night sky, throwing silhouettes across the sand. The enemy fired wildly into the darkness, their shots hitting nothing but empty air. Through it all, Liana remained steady, her scope her world, her breathing her anchor. She felt no pride, no thrill, only necessity. Every shot was survival, every fallen man one less threat to the people she had chosen, however reluctantly, to protect. By the time the SEALs pulled back, the enemy camp was in ruins. Trucks burned, weapons scattered, bodies littered the sand. The survivors fled into the night, broken and disoriented, their vengeance turned back on them. The SEALs regrouped miles away, exhausted but alive, their eyes alight with something close to awe. Torres clapped her on the shoulder, grinning through the dust. "You started that storm, and damn if it didn't swallow them whole." The others murmured their agreement, some laughing in relief, others shaking their heads in disbelief. But Brooks said nothing. He only watched her, his expression unreadable, as if trying to understand the force that had just fought beside him. Back at camp, the mood was different. They had struck a devastating blow, but the cost weighed heavy on Liana. She sat alone by the edge of the fire, cleaning her rifle in silence, her face pale in the flickering light. Torres approached, crouching beside her. "You did it? You saved us again." She shook her head slowly. "I killed them. Dozens of them. And tomorrow there will be dozens more." Her voice was quiet, almost broken. "It never ends." Torres hesitated, searching for words. "Maybe not. But because of you we'll see tomorrow. That has to count for something." She didn't answer, only continued to clean the weapon, her hands steady even as her eyes betrayed the storm inside her. Brooks approached later, his shadow falling across her. For once his voice carried no edge, no command. "You're right. It doesn't end. Not out here. But what you did tonight, it bought us time. Time is everything in war." She looked up at him, her eyes weary but sharp. "And what happens when the time runs out?" Brooks didn't have an answer. He only met her gaze, silent, because he knew she was right. The war would not end because of one battle or 10. But in that silence he also knew something else. Without her, the time they had left would have already been gone. The desert was quiet after the chaos, but quiet in war was always deceptive. Liana knew it, the SEALs knew it too. They had shattered the enemy camp, but fragments of the force still lingered in the shadows, regrouping, waiting for the next chance to strike. The desert had a way of swallowing losses, of hiding wounds in silence, and that silence weighed heavily on everyone as the days passed. Brooks pushed the team hard, drilling them, keeping them sharp, never allowing them to slip into the false comfort of victory. "They'll be back," he reminded them constantly. "They always come back." Liana watched him from a distance, her rifle across her lap, her face carved with exhaustion. She had saved them twice, maybe 3 times now, and yet every day she felt the pull of something darker, something that whispered of all the lives she had taken. Each shot echoed inside her long after the sound had faded, and though she never spoke of it, the weight was crushing her in ways even Torres couldn't ease. It wasn't long before the storm Brooks had warned of began to form again. Recon drones picked up movement, a large enemy column pushing toward their sector, bigger and more organized than the broken force they had just scattered. Trucks bristling with weapons, fighters marching in disciplined lines, flags whipping in the desert wind. This wasn't just retaliation. This was a full-scale assault. Brooks gathered his men again, the map spread between them, his voice clipped but calm. "They're coming in heavy and they're not making the same mistakes. If they overrun us, we're finished." Torres leaned over the map, tracing lines with his finger. "Then we choke them here," he said, pointing to a narrow valley the enemy would have to cross. "Natural kill zone." Brooks nodded but didn't look convinced. His eyes slid to Liana again, and the unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Would she do it again? Would she carry the weight again? Liana sat apart from the planning, her gaze on the horizon where the first plumes of dust were already visible. She didn't need the maps to know what was coming. She could feel it like a shift in the air before a storm. Torres found her later, his voice soft but urgent. "We need you. You know that, right?" She looked at him, her eyes tired, and for the first time she let the truth slip through. "Every time I pull the trigger I lose a piece of myself." "How many pieces until there's nothing left?" Torres swallowed hard. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her she was wrong, but he couldn't lie. Instead he said the only thing he could. "If you don't pull the trigger, it won't just be pieces of you we lose. It'll be all of us." She turned her gaze back to the horizon, the dust rising higher now, blotting out the setting sun. "Then I'll give what I have left," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. The SEALs worked through the night, laying explosives, positioning themselves along the cliffs of the valley. Every detail mattered: timing, angles, fields of fire. They moved with precision, hardened by years of training, but beneath it all there was a current of unease. They had seen what the enemy was bringing. Numbers. Weapons. Rage. And though they trusted their skills, they also knew they were outmatched in every measurable way. Their only advantage was surprise and one woman with a rifle. Liana climbed to her perch before dawn, the desert air biting cold against her skin. She adjusted her scope, her world narrowing to the stretch of valley floor where the enemy would soon march. Her breathing slowed, her hands steady despite the storm raging inside her. This was her war now, whether she wanted it or not. The first trucks appeared as the sun broke the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand. The convoy moved cautiously, wary of traps but confident in their numbers. Men scanned the cliffs with binoculars, rifles bristling, but the seals were invisible in the rocks. Liana watched them through her scope, waiting, every instinct screaming at her to hold until the right moment. When it came, it was sudden and merciless. A single shot cracked through the valley, and the lead officer crumpled from the truck bed. Chaos rippled instantly, men shouting, rifles swinging upward. And then the valley exploded. Charges detonated along the cliffs, fire and stone raining down, trucks flipping, men scattering like insects. The SEALs opened fire, precise, controlled, their ambush a storm of steel and fire. Through it all, Liana was the ghost on the ridge. Her rifle cracked again and again, every shot a thread pulling tighter around the enemy. She cut down men who tried to rally, leaders waving their arms, gunners swinging heavy weapons toward the cliffs. She destroyed radios before they could call for reinforcements, sniped the tires of trucks trying to escape. The valley became a killing ground, the air thick with smoke and screams. Yet for every man that fell, more kept coming, climbing over wreckage, firing blindly into the cliffs. It was endless, and for a terrifying moment, Liana wondered if even her aim would be enough. The SEALs fought like wolves, striking and vanishing, but the enemy's numbers pressed harder, closing the distance. Grenades rattled against the rocks, bullets chewing into stone inches from their faces. Torres cursed as a round grazed his arm, blood soaking his sleeve, but he kept firing, his voice hoarse as he shouted coordinates to Liana. Brooks moved like a machine, calm and deadly, his commands sharp and decisive. Yet even he knew the line between victory and annihilation was razor thin. "We need to break them now," he barked into the comms. "Liana, find me something big." Her scope swept across the valley, searching desperately. Then she saw it, a fuel truck half hidden near the rear of the column, its tank glinting faintly through the smoke. Her pulse quickened. It was a gamble, a nearly impossible shot through haze and chaos, but if she made it, the explosion could break the enemy's advance. She steadied her breathing, her world narrowing to a single crosshair. One shot. That was all it would take. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, and for a heartbeat nothing happened. Then the valley erupted. The fuel truck went up in a fireball that shook the ground, the shockwave knocking men from their feet, flames swallowing trucks and fighters alike. The enemy line broke instantly, panic surging through their ranks as the fire spread. Men screamed, scattering, abandoning weapons as they fled the inferno.